For that, our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani, joins me now on set. Kethevane, hi. So this comes, of course, amid widespread concerns, as we saw from our Israel correspondent there, including in Israel then, about anti-Semitism in Australia specifically, especially since the October 7th attacks and the war between Israel and Hamas. What's driving those widespread concerns?
Well, look, this shooting is really the most serious and, of course, the most deadly of attacks, but it falls within this rise in anti-Semitic attacks and assaults and incidents that we've seen in Australia, as you said, since that October 7th attack, but especially the rise has been very clear in the past year. Now, for context, Australia has about 28 million people. The Jewish community is relatively small compared to the population, but there are anywhere between 120 to 150,000 Jews, and most of them live specifically in Sydney and Melbourne. And what we've seen, and authorities have really documented that, is the fact that there have been more assaults, more vandalism, more threats, more intimidation directed at Jewish people, but also Jewish locations, if you will. And according to official numbers, those attacks or incidents have multiplied more than threefold in the past year. There has been the appointment of a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. So there has been really this acknowledgement by the government that there is a real problem in Australia when it comes to the Jewish community and the threats that they're facing. And to be a little bit more concrete as to what types of attacks we've seen, you have seen synagogues and cars being torched. You have businesses and homes graffitied. You had Jewish people attacked because they were Jewish. But the most vivid examples that really brought to light the situation was the fact that in August, there was a sort of link between those attacks on Jewish people, but also who was responsible. In August, the Prime Minister of Australia blamed Iran for two attacks against Jewish locations and subsequently kicked out the Iranian ambassador to Australia. Those two attacks happened late in 2024. The first one was a fire, an arson attack in a kosher cafe in Sydney's Bondi suburb specifically. That happened in October 2024. And then you had another arson attack. This time it was on a synagogue in Melbourne, which happened just about a year ago in December 2024. So really what you're seeing is this escalation of the types of attacks we're seeing. And that in part is the reason why they were so quick to qualify this as a potential terrorist attack. The police officials saying that they decided to investigate a potential terrorist attack, both because of who and what was targeting the Jewish Australians, as well as an event celebrating Hanukkah, a Jewish holiday, but also because of the method of the attack. It was organized. There were at least two potential suspects involved with guns, but also we know that police officials are now investigating what could be the relation with that car that was found that had those explosive devices there. So it was something that was not simply one person with one handgun shooting on a beach. It was something that was way more organized, it seems, at least with the information we have right now.
Now, Kethevane, this obviously then comes as a shock to the Jewish community, but also Australians at large, especially because, as we know, mass shootings in Australia are exceedingly rare, at least have been over the past couple of decades.
Yes, because the change in Australia's relationship to guns came back in 1996. There was this horrendous massacre in Port Arthur in Tasmania, which left 35 people killed by one gunman. And after that, it was such a shock to the system in Australia that it really changed the way not only the people, but the government decided to deal with access to guns, where there was a drastic tightening of gun laws, how you would be able to get a handgun or a firearm. They made it much more difficult to get them, but they also banned certain types of guns. They banned semi-automatic weapons. They banned pump shotguns, pump rifles, and they also had a whole buyback scheme for firearms, and around 700,000 firearms were returned by Australians during that buyback scheme that the government put in place. And after that, you saw a drastic reduction in the number of gun-related incidents, especially mass shootings. The last time there was a sort of a very famous and headline-grabbing event was back in 2014 when a gunman took 18 hostages in a cafe in Sydney. In the end, in the subsequent shootout, there were two of those hostages who were killed, and then the gunman himself was killed by the police. Since then, there have been a sort of a handful of gun-related incidents. Mostly, they have been sort of murder-suicide that involved families, so much more personal than a sort of random or much broader targeted mass shooting the way we have seen here. And that's why you're seeing Australians react so vividly to what is happening, because unfortunately, we know that the news, there is another shooting that just happened, this time in the United States. And of course, the reaction of the population is way different because in Australia, it really does not happen that often, and especially it does not happen with those numbers of casualties. Right now, again, to remind our viewers, at least 11 people killed, one of the suspect killed, but also at least 29 people injured, taken to the hospital, with possibly some of them having extremely serious injuries.
Kethevane,